So you guys are making movies.
We are.
Daily Wire. You're making shows too. How does it come to be that the Daily Wire, you guys are news aggregators and commentators for the most part. Now you're in this cultural space. Yeah. How does that happen?
It was always part of the vision, right? The company was founded in L.A. Obviously, Ben's lived in L.A. every minute that he wasn't at Harvard. I spent 20 plus years in L.A. before moving the company to Nashville at the end of 2020. Andrew Klavan, screenwriter, novelist, was with the company from the very beginning. There's always been this really kind of Hollywood foundation to what we do. I made a bunch of movies in a previous life that they all failed, but I made them. I'm proud of them. And so when Ben and I made the decision that we wanted to get into business together, one of the things that I told him, and it was an idea that another conservative commentator, Bill Whittle, helped me formulate, was that if we built a media company that was large enough, we would actually have a spotlight, and we could shine that spotlight on other kinds of projects that we might want to make. What happened, and so for me, that was always movies. Like I had a production company with some young actors when I was in my early and mid-20s. I had a production company later in life called Declaration Entertainment that was sort of just probably ahead of its time and underfunded to actually be what it maybe could have been, but was sort of intended to be like a crowdfunding film company before there were crowdfunding companies. So that was always part of what I wanted, but I thought what we would do is we would build up a big enough audience that if I went and made something on the side, I could promote it. To me, that's how I saw it. But what happened in 2020, everybody went home because of COVID. Our office is on Ventura Boulevard in LA. It's the second time we've had to board up because Black Lives Black Lives Matter is rallying on the street, and we're afraid they'll burn down our building. And I'm on the third floor of this office building with my business partner. It's completely empty because no one's been to work in weeks and weeks and weeks. And I said, Hollywood's over. Like, what can they make now? They've decided that the police are bad. Literally 40% of everything that Hollywood makes is about a cop. They can't do anything if this is the position they're going to take. And that's when we realized not only had we built that spotlight that Ben and I had always wanted to build, but we had built something else too. We had actually built the distribution mechanism because we had built this streaming video on demand platform for our podcasts, for the video versions of our podcasts. And it just occurred to us in that moment, the technology is agnostic as to what the content is. We've essentially built Netflix. We just haven't put movies on it yet. So if we bring in the one other thing you need for a successful entertainment company is just production. If we bring in production, we actually have marketing and distribution. Why don't we give that a try? And because I know there isn't a God, but if you ever think about how the world has so much purpose and how everything's so complex and beautiful, it's almost like a godlike being, probably from outer space, built it all. Not God, because that would be a silly thing.
That's insane. Like, what kind of a crazy person?
But like just a godlike being, if you really think about it. That when the godlike being, sometimes there's this like fortuitousness or providence that happens in the world. And as we're having this thought, Dallas Sonye, who's been a guest on this show, called me and said, hey, I made this great movie called Run, Hide, Fight, and Hollywood won't buy it because I've basically been blacklisted. And we just saw that as an opportunity to test the theory. If we put a great production through our marketing and through our distribution mechanism, what will happen? It was an unbelievable success for us. The movie paid for itself in something like 7 days. Wow. And we realized that we had an actual now opportunity, and I always think opportunities are always responsibilities. So now I say we have a responsibility to go chase this.
Let me tell you about impact. I would like for you, sir, to please read the headline on the screen.
I watched a Ben Shapiro movie by accident.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is some leftist who watched, I believe they watched Shut-In, and liked it so much they tweeted how much they liked it, saying if you're looking for something to watch, Shut-In is pretty fun, and Vincent Gallo gets his ass kicked if you're into that sort of thing. That's a tweet I wrote a couple weeks ago, late on Saturday night. It no longer exists. The reason it doesn't exist is because almost immediately after I posted it, I got a DM from a friend. That movie was produced by the ultra right-wing Daily Wire with only ultra right-wing producers, talent, and so forth for the market. What? No, delete, what? Yep. They're trying to make real movies now. Sneak that ish in under the cover of actual production values. For F's sake, this always happens to me. I will be watching an ultra-evangelical movie and not realize it's ultra-evangelical. I'll be listening to Christian radio and not realize it's a Christian radio. If Jesus is around, I need him to announce himself, or I'll just think he's from Brooklyn. The funny thing about this is that I hope it's satire, and it may be, but I'm assuming it's not. I don't know.
It's the greatest article. I mean, at the end, they say maybe if you keep doing this, maybe one day I'll watch one of your movies on purpose.
Well, but here's real quick. We did talk about this the other day, but I just want to point out, with you here, get your thoughts. This is someone who's saying they actually really enjoy evangelical movies or the Daily Wire's content, but it says a lot that they're unwilling to watch things they enjoy because of cult-like behavior. And so the point I made before we got on the show is thinking about your commercial with Jeremy's Razors. It's an objectively funny commercial. Okay, obviously, humor is subjective to a lot of people, but it's very much in line with a lot of the, the real American heroes bits that were happening out through the 2000s, 2010s, real men of whatever and that stuff. And it's an over the top, it's silly, use a flamethrower to torch, and there's a lot of jokes. It's funny. The Native American Elizabeth Warren you have standing behind you, a lot of jokes in there. The people who claim it's not funny or they don't like it, they're only saying that because they're part of a cult they have to adhere to.
That's right.
Privately, they admit they like your movies, but they must say they don't like it for the sake of their political tribe.
Well, also, when these people say something isn't funny, am I supposed to sit there and go, well, the things you think are hilarious tend to be really valuable and enjoyable to watch. So, of course, I trust your opinion on this. None of their comedy is good. But part of why I think this, and I could be wrong, part of why I think that this is probably satire is because, unfortunately, most of the stuff that conservatives and evangelicals make tends not to be funny or entertaining. And they're saying that they keep seeing things made by evangelicals that they don't know are evangelical, which is kind of part of why I'm thinking it's satirical, but I could be wrong.
I'd like to quote Justin Roiland, or his character, Rick Sanchez. Your boos mean nothing. I've seen what makes you cheer.
Yeah,
best
that's right.
quote.
So there you go. I mean, first of all, the funny thing is they cheered for your guys' movie. And they're only booing it now when they realized who made it. I'm like, no, you can't take it back. You cheered for it. We know you like it.
Yep.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, as an insecure artist, anytime anybody says they like anything that I did, I don't hear anything they say after that. Like it's
backsies.
It's all a buzz, yeah.
So what's the plan? What's next? TV shows?
Yeah. TV shows, movies. We, as with the Razor Company, we just see a lot of opportunity in the destruction that the left is bringing to the culture right now. I mean, I think it's tragic. Listen, if I could snap my fingers and put the country back together and have everything be like it was back when I grew up, I'd probably do it. If I could be dictator, that's what I'd just say, hey, it should be 1990s all over again. I kind of like the 1990s.
The 90s were epic, dude.
Yeah, there was no... The races all got along, and
Power
everybody was doing pretty well. Your
Fast food
401k was going
that
up.
bad.
That's right.
Transformers, Beast Wars? Come on.
Dude, 97,
Well,
93.
but you can't do that. And it would be disingenuous for us to say, in all of this destruction, there's not an opportunity for creativity.
No, absolutely.
There is, and we should take it.
I totally agree, and this is part of why I got into the sphere. Firstly, I just always wanted to make entertaining content. I lean right. People on the show who watch me regularly know this. And what ended up happening is I just got to a place after I launched my channel and was doing these political cartoons for a little while where I just realized I didn't really need to try to put a message into anything. I just needed to make something that I thought was funny and my values would naturally come out in it. So often what happens when conservatives try to make content, or evangelicals, Christians, even Catholics try to make content, is they will really hit you over the head with what the central message is supposed to be instead of just making something that's enjoyable to watch. And it turns out really cheesy. Now, what's ended up happening over the past couple of years is the left has adopted that strategy. And so much of what they produce is message first, substance later. And so you're absolutely correct that they're tearing their whole empire down, because I remember as a kid, we used to watch films and television shows from the 1950s or 60s with our dad, and he would make comments about how they could never make that today. Now we're saying that about things that were made 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's right.
How do you guys get around the ESG stuff that's been coming? You're familiar with what is it?
Environmental, social
governance?
Yeah.
So for real quick, for those that aren't familiar, this is basically social credit scores for businesses, and they expect you to be woke, to have these diversity statements. Otherwise, they could negatively impact your ability to get loans and things like that. So the Daily Wire is making all this content. You guys are going after culture, but isn't there a risk there if these other institutions come at you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of risk everywhere. One of the problems I think that conservatives face right now in the economy more broadly is there are so many potential vectors of attack. And you could put a lot of money into chasing any one of them, and then that could just not be where the attack comes. So you wasted all of your resources trying to plan for a disaster that never came, and now the disaster can come from a whole other angle. An example of this, conservatives want to build their own social media platforms right now. You hear every time I talk to any sort of like conservative billionaire, the first thing they say is, when are we going to get a Facebook? And I say, Facebook is 20 years old, bud. You will probably get one 10 years from now. It's been half a biblical generation since it was created. So I think that you're getting close. Soon you will have one. But that's the whole problem with conservatism from an investment class point of view. Most high net worth conservatives made their money in energy, or they made their money in real estate. They made their money in agriculture, very conservative ways of making money. The result of that is, if a kid with a backpack walks into their family office and says, hey, I designed an app that lets you rank how hot girls on campus are. I think if you gave me a little capital, I could turn it into the dominant communication platform ever conceived in all of human history. They would call security and throw that guy out.
Yep.
Now, 20 years later, they go, why don't we have a seat at that table? But if a kid with a backpack walked in now and pitched them blockchain or pitched them Meta, they would have the same reaction that they had 20 years. So it's like, I bet we have a conservative Facebook in 10 years, and I bet that we have a conservative metaverse in 45 years from now, right? Like that's the problem. And so, but as with all problems, it creates certain opportunity. We found an early investor in our company who was able to get us off the ground. We took money from them that helped us for the first 14 months. In month 14, the Daily Wire was cash flow positive. We've paid for all of our growth since then out of cash flow. We did $120 million of revenue in the last 12 months. Sometimes I get angry when people are like, billionaires pay for everything you do. No. Like many companies, we were privileged to get some startup capital, but we funded all of this out of our success.
So you're just saying Daily Wire pulls in $10 million a month?
Yeah, and
Wow.
because of that, the ESG stuff right now doesn't apply to us, right? We don't, because we funded our own growth. It's sort of like your situation here. You've built something. Now, you didn't even have the amount of startup capital that we had, but you've built something that you own, and because you own it, you can't be canceled from it. You can't be thrown out of it. Now, our goal at the Daily Wire is to become an institution. Our goal at the Daily Wire is to challenge the left on an institutional level, because we think that's the only place that true victory can take place. Maybe at some point we'll have to go to the public markets. But what we won't do is get caught up in this ESG stuff. Like, it may come to, at a certain point, we have to decide, do we subject ourselves to forces that change what we are, or do we not grow? And
what the risk I see is,
yeah.
Well, I'll phrase it this way. When I watched that commercial you put out, when I saw the building you were in and the TV and the structure, I'm like, that reminds me of Vice. You know, when I worked there, when they were edgy, when they were offensive, when they were shocking, the way they designed their buildings, and I was like, man, is the Daily Wire like Vice now? Like how they used to be? How did Vice go from being sex, drugs, and rock and roll into wokeness, outright, establishment? And there comes a time,
hundreds of millions in institutional capital.
Did they go public?
But it's they want to. I think they're trying to go through a SPAC. They've wanted to for a while. My understanding is, what I was told by former higher ups who were at the company, is that they had been attacked so many times by they had harassment complaints, sexual harassment, that the press was bad, and they had paid people out, and there was a risk of certain stories going public. So their investors said, just declare yourselves like a feminist company, like make feminist content, adopt this, and you'll shield yourself from these claims. And so the idea, this is what I was told, that, and this is someone who was like, I worked at Vice. They said, when the investors came in and said, be a feminist company and you will be safer from these attacks, they said, okay, because the executives didn't care. So my understanding is they were just like, hey, whatever gets people off our back, you guys, no problem. We just want to make cash and run a business.
None of these executives care. Disney doesn't care about the grooming law down in Florida, right? Of course they don't. What they care about is their 23-year-old woke employees, making it impossible for them to conduct their business. What they care about is the fact that the left is so skilled at weaponizing, and they want to avoid those attacks to their business. And so the thing about virtue is that it's actually a really cheap currency. You just say something. Hollywood's always peddled in this, even in the glory days of the 90s, and we were all walking around sucking on a big gulp or whatever. Everybody in Hollywood wanted to save the freaking whales, because of course they want to save the whales, because when you're on like your third marriage and 4 out of your 5 kids are in rehab, and
gotta save something, I guess.
Yeah, everyone needs to see themselves as good on some level. Right. And if you're good Christians do this too, by the way. An easy out is to find an abstract way to be good. It says in one of the epistles written by the Apostle John that it's easier to love your neighbor whom you know than to love God. And Christian, every time you talk to a Christian, they'll go, well, that's not really true. I mean, my neighbor's kind of a jerk. My brother's kind of a jerk. But of course I love God. And I said, well, you don't. I mean, God himself in the epistle says that you don't. You say that you do because you've abstracted a God that you can love more than your brother whom you know. You've created a God to love who approves of you and who doesn't have anything that you disapprove of. Your neighbor, your brother who you know, has all kinds of crap that you don't approve of. And so you see, like, it's very easy to give money to African missionary work or African charities or to save the whales or to save the environment. These are ways of abstracting your way out of having to deal with the messy reality of the world. If you really care about people, you interact with those actual people and try to make improvements into their lives, right?
Yeah, I would actually agree with that. And I would go as far as to say when somebody says that they love God, but they hate the people around them, don't do anything to improve their circumstances, either material or spiritually, that person really worships themselves because their vision of God is just, as you said, something abstract that caters to all of their particular desires. One thing that I think our society has really lost is people are not focused as much on what is near to them. They want to solve problems on the other side of the world. That's a huge part of progressive politics. In fact, you could argue it's the only part of progressive politics is to defer responsibility elsewhere. Historically, people understood you were supposed to love those closest to you, care for your family first and foremost, and then you started to worry about the people around you. Now it's the exact opposite. I can treat my family horribly, but as long as I am theoretically good to someone on the other side of the world, I'm a good person, even though my entire social life is a complete failure.
The greatest psychologist of our time has a statement.
Jordan Peterson, you have to clean your room, man.
But that's exactly
dirty.
the meme. The meme is
true.
You can't change the world if you can't even get your own life in order.
Yeah.
But I want to point something else out too.
Well, also
when I'm looking at this article from Defector, and they're holding up a sign saying "F you Ben Ish Piro," like just cussing at him, I think to myself, I don't recall seeing conservatives holding up signs saying "F you, Jen Uger," or to be fair, obviously sometimes they do, but it's kind of a common occurrence among the left to hate and to hate without trying to understand. Yeah. So I'm thinking about Daryl Davis. He's been working with Bill Ottman over at Minds. They want to de-radicalize extremists, not deplatform them. It's one of the things they're working on. And Daryl Davis, he's the guy who went to Klan meetings, a black man, and just talked to these people to try and understand them, ends up de-radicalizing them. It's fascinating because when I see how the modern left, the activist left, not like regular run-of-the-mill, Democrat voters, they're, mostly just regular people aren't paying attention maybe. Yep. But these activists they hate so much. It's the weirdest thing that Glenn Beck can tell Dave Rubin, I disagree with you and I think what you're doing is wrong, but I love you. Yep. And what do they say? They say, F you, Ben Ish Piro. I'm like, man, Glenn Beck tells the people he disagrees with that he loves them. They tell you they hate you. I don't understand why anybody would want to be a part of that.
Yeah. Well, this is the problem with dogma and ideology and politics, is that they allow you not to have to actually engage with the world as it is. You're only required to engage with the world sort of as you perceive it, juxtaposed against a code of essentially of your own making. And people can say, well, no, my dogma is 2,000 years old, or my dogma is, comes straight from Athens, or whatever it is. But the truth is, if you're a person who can't engage in reality, then your dogma is an abstract. Your dogma is just a reflection of things that you want. And it's a way of, to your point, mitigating responsibility for the actual people around you. I've thought a little bit about I actually was about to say something that I had committed not to say on the air, so I'm not going to say it.
Nice work.
Thank you. It's rare that I make a good decision, but I just made a good decision.
I hear you.
But it's so important. God, if you're going to believe in God or the godlike alien who actually made the heavens and the earth,
there's a whole conversation there.
You actually have to believe, like, God has to be the God of reality. I took a friend 10 years ago. I'm married to a woman. I won't say her name or talk about her too much, but I will tell you this funny story that I took a friend's future in-laws out to a movie 10 years ago. And the first thing that his future mother-in-law said to me after the movie was, I said, "Oh, did you enjoy the movie?" And she goes, "Well, I don't really like movies." I said, "Oh, great." And she said, you and your wife are married? I said, "Yeah, we've been married a short amount of time." She said, "Well, in God's eyes, she's still married to her first husband." And I said, "Oh, well, God must be an idiot."
Wrong.
Because that's not true.
But
that is not reality. God has to be the God of reality, not the God of an abstract fantasy.
But I think, I would argue as a Christian that it's an abstract fantasy that you can divorce and remarry if it was a legitimate marriage in the first place. Because one of the definitions of marriage is that it's a lifelong commitment until death do you part.
But what would you argue as a Seamus?
As a Seamus? Well, I mean, that's my belief.
Do you actually believe it, or do you just believe that the Christians believe it?
No, I believe it. I mean, I think most Christians don't believe it. Unfortunately, I think a lot of Christians have abandoned that. It's not a popular teaching anymore.
I suppose you could define the word marriage meaning to mix. So if you're going to mix your soul with something, if there is a God, if there's an energy field,
there's no unmixing that soul.
That's a good point. Well, no, there's no unsaluting a solution, but I think you can reverse a mixture.
If you mix red and blue paint together, you ain't getting them back out. Right?
Yeah, I mean I don't know.
It's a meaningless analogy.
I
think you're onto it though. Yeah.
Well, let's.
I'll push back on that just a little bit.
Sure.
God's the God of reality. Divorce
Absolutely.
exists in the Bible. That's not a recommendation of divorce, which is a horrible, terrible thing. But the idea that God lives in a sort of abstract where things are as they should be, how far back do you take that? Essentially, if that's the case, then God still lives in Eden before the fall happened. God still lives in a place where people haven't been living in sin, where people haven't been making mistakes, where none of the sort of none of the eventualities that came from that causality of sin have ever occurred, and God is abstracted out of being the God of actual people in an actual place in an actual time. The God of the Bible, in my estimation, is a God who actually took on sin and took on the consequences of sin on himself in Christ. As a result of that, he becomes God of a reality that's he becomes God of the people who have existed in reality, not just the people who could have existed in the abstract. So I just think that any time that we used, this is a great example. That's a place where we use sort of a dogma or an ideology to deny a reality that's right in front of us. I think you see it a lot with what's happening in Ukraine right now, by the way, where regardless of your opinion about NATO expansion, regardless of your opinion about the merits of Zelensky, regardless of your opinion about a lot of things, like Vladimir Putin actually did invade Ukraine, and Ukraine did not want to be invaded. And you see a lot of people, left and right, but particularly on the right, who are almost in denial about that situation because it doesn't line up with their political point of view. They have a political point of view that Ukraine shouldn't have done certain things, or that Putin was more friendly to the West than he actually turned out to be, or that Putin was a better representative. You even hear people on the right now saying that Putin was a better representative of Christianity because he built a cathedral, at one point in time or something. And then actual reality takes place in front of them. They have a very hard time pivoting to accept it because it's out of line with their expectations based on how they thought the world should be.
Yeah, Hitler was Time Man of the Year.
Hitler was Times Man of the Year.
And they did appease him for a long time.
So I hear some of what you're saying, and I agree with some of what you're saying, but I would say where we definitely disagree is that I would argue that God having moral prescriptions for us that we ourselves do not live up to does not mean that he's over abstracted or doesn't govern our reality, because it's actually Christ in Scripture who says what God has brought together, let no man put asunder, and anyone who leaves their husband commits adultery, etc.
The challenge.
He also says if you have lust in your heart, you are an adulterer.
Yeah,
you're not on the
adultery.
You're not on the path to adultery. You're not
Agreed.
kind of like an adulterer if you really think about it. You are one.
I wonder about that. If you're in a marriage and you're thinking about having sex with another woman, does that make you cheating on your wife?
Yes, that's adultery of the heart.
That's crazy. How do you control your thought? Like, you got to learn to control your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Custody of the thoughts. I mean, nothing happens in the world that didn't first happen in the human heart.
Well,
I would actually disagree. I think the entire purpose of the Sermon on the Mount is to get us out of these abstractions. It's to bring the full weight of condemnation. It's so that no one can claim not to be an adulterer, not so that we can also try to figure out how to not commit adultery in our heads.
So I would absolutely agree that people should not be sinning here, and it is certainly not my claim to say that I am not a sinner or that I have not committed adultery of the heart, etc. It's simply to say that I don't believe recognizing that negates the moral precepts that Christ put forth.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.